All right,
Okay.
go ahead.
On behalf of the Oregon Public Library, my name is Tim Ahren, and I've written this new book called Dark Creatures, A Simple Game. That was my second book. My first one is also The Salvation of Tanglegal. Although both books are separate, the second one feeds into the first one. So if you read the second one and haven't read the first one, you should go back and read the first one because you'll get all sorts of clues on what's going on in the second one. Let's see. So about the book. The book is dark fantasy. It takes place in 3 different worlds, 3 different planes of existence simultaneously, which means what's happening in one plane is actually affecting what's happening in the Earth plane, which is affecting what's happening in the world of dark creatures. Everybody in this book is a pawn except for 2 people who are controlling the entire game. And those people are only controlling this entire game because they're bored. So, the book itself is about 310 pages. I could read you the back of it to give you a better description of it. And I also answer questions about it in case anyone's interested. The gods chose 2 unsuspecting players as pawns in what was supposed to be a simple game of dark creatures. A simple game of dark creatures to the gods would be they'll take a section, a town, a small city maybe, and they'll quarantine it off amongst themselves. So these gods are gods that no longer have a place in the world, which means they're not Satan, they're not Jehovah, they're not any other god that right now has prominence in the world. They are gods that have been forgotten. They're Greek gods, Roman gods, Babylonian gods, any god you can look back in on history and say no one prays to these people anymore. They at one time had substance. They at one time had followers and worshipers for reasons of which are explained in the book. But right now they don't, which means that since they're eternal beings, since they've been brought into the world by the belief of their followers, they can't leave until the end of time. Now, if you're stuck until the end of time, what better way to pass the time than play games on a small scale that won't be noticed by any other gods that might actually be prevalent in this world. As long as you keep it small, you only play with a certain amount of people, there's a good chance that any other deity that is now actually worshipped is going to say anything about it because you're not really disturbing them. They're doing whatever they want to do anyway. So that's what these gods are. The simple game of dark creatures then is a 3-layer game. It's the gods who are bored, who are now currently starting this game in the current book. There are the people they chose to play with. And when I say play, I mean play. Think of a chessboard. They're playing with them. And then these people are actually given the ability to play with other beings from a world called dark creatures. So what you have here is you have 3 separate sets of entities all playing a game at the same time on different levels. One set of playing characters, which would be Augury Parse and Lilica Trevelyan, which is from Dark Creatures, have no idea that they're actually participating in anything other than their normal lives. They're given direction by what they feel is someone above them because they follow their own deity, God, Lord, whatever they consider themselves to be following, and that person is its messenger. So that they go where that person tells them to. In other words, they're just living a regular, normal, everyday life. Then there are the 2 humans who are actually stuck in this game, who are unaware at the moment that they're being played with. Now that would be Doug Pimpkin, which you're really gonna hate. And and the other one is William J. Donovan, who's the hero of the story at the moment. He's a I think I made him a sophomore in high school, sophomore or junior. Now both of these people think they are actually playing a 9-bit retro video game called Dark Creatures. And they think this individual who they are playing this game for is actually having them test this game to see if it's any good. What this actual game actually is the world of dark creatures with Augury and Lilica, and they're actually moving these people places around in a contest of wills on this game, like you would if you were playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons online, or a game of Oblivion online, or a game of World of Warcraft online. So they think they're just playing a 9-bit game. They're not actually aware that they're actually affecting anyone else's lives besides their own, which they're just living and playing a video game. Now, on top of that, you have 2 gods who are known as Janus. If you're interested in who the gods of what the gods of Janus are, I suggest you go to the Oregon Public Library or their site and look up Roman gods, and you'll find out who Janus is. These 2 individuals now are playing this game with Doug and William in order to pass the time because they're bored. And whoever wins, wins, and then another god will come down from the gallery that's provided and decide to play another game with another person, and everybody else gets to watch that one. The problem is that one of the gods has chosen Doug Pimpkin, which is our villain, who's gotten out of control just a little bit. And the problem being that there are other forces now interfering with this once simple game, because it's all supposed to be short, sweet, and to the point. You have forces of good and forces of evil. One's going to win, one's going to lose. It's very short. Not anymore. So now you have other forces intruding on this game, trying to make it their own while using this format. Unfortunately, by doing that, they've expanded the size of the game from a small, simple game into a rather large one. When you get large enough in this type of genre, type of game of gods, to shut off an entire town, like a town, say, the size of Middleton, that gets noticed. So as you move through the book, you'll find that the people in charge of setting up this game are getting more and more worried that the bigger the game gets, the more they're going to get noticed. And if they get noticed by a deity who's currently involved in the world and is not happy with something that's going on, you got problems. I personally left, I know it sounds incredible, but I personally left religion pretty much to whoever is reading the book to set whatever they decide they want to set, which means that there's no prominent religion set in the book. If you are an atheist and you wish to believe that there is no God, you can still read the book, still enjoy everything as it goes on, and still keep whatever you want to believe believable. Everything works in that fashion. The book cover was made by my good friend Eric Turman from Lucid Style Author Services. He's a graphic artist, and he, in my opinion, did a fantastic job with the cover. He did a wraparound one. It wraps all the way around the book. I also had interior artists do work on places inside the world of dark creatures, and that's James Reich. He's the pen and ink illustrator. I recommend, if you're interested in his work, that you could email me and ask me about how to get a hold of him, because his black and white work is phenomenal. Just a moment, I'll show you a picture of it. There's one picture of it, for instance. His black and white work is just phenomenal. He brings to life a lot of the scenes in the book. That would be the first book of Dark Creatures. This is designed to be a series of books. I'm hoping I sell enough of them to make a series out of it. Self-publishing in and of itself can be easy or hard. I'm taking the harder route because I like to produce a quality piece of work. You can go through Amazon. Not that Amazon hasn't got quality pieces of work. They do. They produce a lot of good quality books. You don't have as much freedom of control when you publish through Amazon as you would if you self-publish to another publisher like Lucid Style. But if you haven't got the money to do that, then you might want to go through Amazon too. I highly recommend Lucid Style because Jean Turman from Lucid Style is definitely really great in setting up the book, the design, the paper she's choosing. the inside of the book, what the inside of the book looks like, the way the chapters are broken up. She does a fantastic job making sure your spelling is correct. That's also really good. Same thing goes for The Salvation of Tanglagel, which is the first book I went through Lucid Style. Once again, I got a great cover from Eric. He did all the interior artwork to this one, and he did a fantastic job with that. All of it's black and white. The Salvation of Tanglagel, which is my first book, which is this one. That actually is a bunch of short stories, 13 in total, wrapped together with a central theme. So you have 13 stories of varying degrees. There's dark fantasy, there's current events, science fiction, all wrapped together with a central story that runs all the way down the center. So at the end, in the last story, it pulls all those stories together into one, which I liked. As I said, if you read The Salvation of Tanglagel, you'll get more out of Dark Creatures simply because there are Easter eggs in Dark Creatures about Tanglagel. In other words, I took stories from Tanglagel, characters from Tanglagel, and I incorporated them into Dark Creatures. On top of that, as a boost to The Salvation of Tanglagel, which is extremely inexpensive right now, I also have a forward, someone who read the book and enjoyed it enough to write me a forward of Pierce Anthony. If you know who Pierce Anthony is, he's an award-winning author, and he was very, very nice enough to agree to write me a forward about the book, and he did a great job with it. I currently do not have a forward for Dark Creatures, but if you do buy Dark Creatures and or appreciate it, I really need you to go and give me a review on Amazon or anywhere else. The more reviews I get for the book, the more prominent it'll get in Amazon and Barnes & Noble, which is being sold at, and or my website, which is www.thedarkcreatures.com. The more reviews I get, the more prominent the book gets, the more advertising it gets, the more sales I make, the more chance there'll be a second book, which I'm working on currently right now, that'll be able to publish sooner. Otherwise, it's going to take me a little while to get the second book out because, as I said, self-publishing the way I publish it is a little expensive. So that would be for that. If you'd like, I could read a little bit from the second book if you're interested, unless someone has questions right now about what I've said so far. No?
I have a question.
Yes. Sarah.
I really want to know if any of the characters in either of your books were inspired by actual people that you know.
No.
No, none of them.
No, I took, if the closest I can get for anybody in that particular point would be I took fractions of personalities from people, lots of different people.
Gotcha.
Especially if you're considering, for instance, Doug Pimpkin. I took nobody that I knew from Doug Pimpkin.
Thank the Lord.
No, I created that particular character, which is the evil guy in Dark Creatures. I took that particular character from several different sources. I did a lot of research on Ted Bundy, who was a big serial killer in the 70s. He killed over 130 women. It was really bad. Ed Gein, who enjoyed taking not only live people, but already deceased individuals and making gourmet meals out of them. And there were several others. Jeffrey Dahmer, I looked into his. I did a lot of research on serial killers and how they act and how they work, and a lot of psychological work on other personality traits that would make Doug the most despicable individual that you could possibly think of, yet still operate under the radar. You can still operate in society as if you were just a normal individual or a normal outcast type person that you'd never look at twice. Or if you did look at him twice, you'd want to cross the street. But you wouldn't bother him. You wouldn't consider him an evil guy. You'd just walk by him and go, "Whoa, that guy needs a bath," or "Whoa, that guy needs to take care of himself better," or "I don't want anything to do with him," or if you got to talking to him and you agreed with everything his philosophy entails, beyond his warped senses, that is, then you might actually like him. You actually might enjoy talking to him about how he believes the world is completely, the quality of the world is completely terrible. In fact, it's so bad that anyone who doesn't have a leg up, or anyone who is a misfit in this world, it completely has no chance. No understanding. No one will understand them. In fact, people will pick on them and yell at them and laugh at them, all behind their backs, of course. So they're probably laughing behind your back if you were one of those misfits. And you have to understand how that works. So he could talk to you all day about this stuff, and you wouldn't think, "Oh, this is just a guy who's got pretty extreme views." You really wouldn't realize exactly what was going on. Unless, of course, he invited you over to his house.
That's right. His
Then
wall decor.
Then you would get an idea of exactly what Doug was after. So no, I took a couple of aspects from my own life for William, but it's only a couple of things that were minor. Like when I was in high school, I loved to race the bus home. So that's where I got that scene from. So when I got out of high school, and when I was a freshman and a sophomore, instead of going to pep rallies, I ran the bus home. And 90% of the time, I beat it.
Nice job.
But otherwise, no. William's just a bunch of kids or people I knew when I was growing up, aspects of their personality. Let's see. Augury and Lulica are actually made up of nobody that I've met. I created their own personalities based off of, probably different movie characters I've seen or different movie or books I've read. What I would like the type of person to be. I built those two characters from scratch. Same thing with Hunter from the book and from Tangle. Same thing with Irina. Although I didn't use the name of a coworker, I do know. Because I couldn't think of a better name at the time. The same thing with Ragman, same thing with him. All these characters I built from scratch, and if you're curious about how I did that, well, for me, it's simple. Everyone else looks at me and goes, "I can't do that." It's just like anyone can write a book. Anyone can build a character from scratch. It's simple. First thing you have to do is figure out, which is probably the hardest part for everybody, what type of book you want to write. What type of genre do you enjoy the most? So if you enjoy fantasy the most, it'd be easiest for you to write fantasy. If you enjoy horror the most, it'd be easiest for you to write a horror book. Same thing with contemporary. That's how I think, personally, I don't know for sure, never talked to the man personally, but that's how I think Stephen King got started in horror writing, is because he understood how to write horror. He enjoyed it. If you enjoy what you're writing, that's half the battle. Now, let's see, how to set a scene. How to set a scene? I'm not here to tell you how to write a book. I'm really just here to give you suggestions, because I can't really tell you how to write a book, because you can go to schools, you can go to literature schools, I'm not going to knock that. You can go to classes, you can go to camps, and all these other writers will tell you how they write books. But you have to develop your own style. Now, you can copy other people's style when you start. Like, say I want to write like Stephen King, so I'm going to read a lot of Stephen King books and start copying what he writes. You can start that as a starting point, which is good. It'll give you experience in how to in writing. But eventually, as you write, you'll develop your own style. It takes a little while, but you'll get there. I always suggest people start with short stories. Start writing their own short stories. Maybe it could be maybe 2-page short stories, 5-page short stories. Write small. But as you're writing, try to figure out what you're writing. So if you want to write horror, for instance, like Megan really enjoys horror, what type of horror do you want to write? Do you want to write a fantasy horror, which is dark fantasy? Do you want to write a real-life horror, which is contemporary horror? Stephen King's great at that. He's also great at dark horror. He writes fantasy horror, too. Do you want to write what you see on TV? Do you want to write horror, historical horror, like I could recommend something I've seen. Hopefully, won't bother you if I mention a movie I saw on Netflix, not Netflix, but on Amazon lately. Will it? Does it bother the Oregon Public Library if I do that? No? Okay.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. A good example of that would be Fallen Birds, which I just saw on Prime. That's historical horror. And it's beautifully written, beautifully done. It sucks you in. The problem in my opinion, mind you, with a lot of current media, and I'm not picking on anyone in particular, but a lot of current media is that either they wait too long to hook you, or they hook you right away and then nothing happens. That's what writing short stories will teach you in the genre in which you want to write, is how to pace yourself. It's Burt Lancaster said something to an actor once, and I don't know if any of you all remember who Burt Lancaster was. He's a very old actor, great actor, but he said something once to a young actor he was acting with. The young actor had walked up to him he was in the film with, and he said, "Well, how do you do such a great performance? Because when I'm on, I'm all nervous, and I'm trying to say my lines correctly and stuff like that." And Lancaster looked at him, and he was getting up there in age. This was one of his last films, and he said, "Because," it was Michael York, I do believe. He said, "Because I've been watching you." He said, "What happens is that you blow your whole performance all at once. Just blow it all up. What you got to do is you got to take your time, like walking up a hill in the middle of the summer. You got to take your time and build until you get to the top of that hill, and then you want to do the most you can with it. You have to build on a story before you make a story." So if you're reading a short story and you're bored with it by, say, the 5th page, that writer hasn't really done much to pull you into the story. Or the atmosphere he's written isn't written to the point that it would attract you. In other words, he hasn't seen what he's writing. So if you're into, Megan, for instance, if you're into a modern horror and you want to hook somebody in a short story, that's why I always suggest short stories, is you want to hook them fast, because it's a short story. You only have maybe 10 to 15 pages to write, maybe 20 if you go on. You want to avoid novellettas, which are way too long for a short story. They won't work in a short story format. And you can't send them to magazines, because magazines will send them back going, the format's way, way, way too big for our pages. So what you want to do is you want to start with your character in a short story and then build the surroundings around your character as quickly as you can with, say, two paragraphs. And then you want to tell the reader what your villain, monster, character, or savior is doing at this particular moment. In order to do that, you should try to live that moment with your character when you're writing it. So if you're writing, I don't know, I sound kind of passionate about this. I'm sorry, I've been doing it for years. So if you're writing a horror story about Kohl's department store, for instance, and you want to make a contemporary horror story, say, let's see, contemporary would be real life. So you take a character, since you know yourself best, you take a character based off yourself, and you would name her something different, dress her in a different way, whatever you want to disassociate yourself so that the readers don't immediately come running to you and go, "You're that person, aren't you?" And you really want to try to avoid that. Or, "That person is that one over there, isn't he? I can tell by the way he's..." And then once you got your main character, which is closest to you, since it's easy enough to mirror yourself in a short story that way, to start with anyway. And then you want to take a character that you're writing about. So you want to write about a sociopath. Now I'm going to make it psychopath because I just finished writing about psychopaths, and those are pretty easy for me right in the moment. Psychopaths step outside of society. In fact, they believe they're above society. You want to do a little research in how they think so that you can step into their skin for a moment or two and think like them. If you cannot think like the character you're writing, then no one's going to believe it. So if you step outside yourself for a bit and you say you make your character James Gear, for instance. Names are easy. The easiest way to come up with characters is to look around you. James is just above a name, above general name of a person I used to know. Gear is from Netgear. I can use the same thing by going to any of my characters behind me or any of my books behind me. I'm going Levy. Levy Knight, as in Nightbot. Names are pretty easy. All you have to do is look around for something that sounds like it would work in society. It's very easy.
Tim,
can
your
you hear me?
camera tilted.
Yeah, your camera.
Oh, my camera fell. Sorry. It likes to do
There
it.
you are.
Sorry about that. It's very easy. When I bang my desk, it tends to do that. So I'll try to lower my enthusiasm. So you're making a psychopath. What does your psychopath want? Well, he works at Cole's department store. Why does he work at Cole's department store? Because there's a lot of people. Yeah, well, there's a lot of people. What does James want? James wants to pick a certain person out. James is a predator. So James works at a department store like Cole's because he has a whole flock of sheep about him, and he's a shepherd. Which means you have to cull a herd occasionally, and there are people who just do not deserve to be part of his flock. There are people out there who just don't understand how useless they really are. He knows. You can see it. It's right there in front of him. But everybody else, no, they're sheep. All but this one person who's a disease. There's a disease for the sheep. But how to get rid of that sheep without being caught? Well, first you got to get to know the sheep and know their ways. Know how they walk. Know how they talk. Know where they live. Know what they enjoy. So you snuggle up to them like a good old friend. Yeah, that's right. You're in Cole's department store. You're all just one big happy family. All a bunch of people working, talking about stuff. You like horror. Yeah. Hey, you know, I've got this great book called Dark Creatures, and I'd love you to read it. It's dark fantasy. You'll really love it. Do you mind if I drop it by your place tonight? We've known each other for about 6 months. I know how you look. I know how you smell. I know. I just drop it off really quick, on my way to my part-time job, and if that's all right with you, that'd be fine with me. In which case, that would give me the opportunity to do other things. All of that is built into a short story. So that's your main character. That's your evil guy. That's what he wants. Now you take the character that you decided to be based off of you. Now, what you have to ask yourself is, do you want this to be a really dark story? In other words, do you want everything to happen to your main character from the bad guy and there's nothing she can do about it? Or would you like your character to be forthright and possibly be able to stand up or escape the situation that you've given your main character? That's something you really have to decide. Now, if you want that character to survive, then you have to give that main character who's working alongside the psychopath a reason to survive. You have to give her the intellect or a reason in which she would figure out something ain't quite right here. All of this actually can be done by anyone who does it a lot, like me, for instance. I can come up with a scene, as I just pointed out, I can come up with a scene, set up a base of characters, and come up with a situation in under 15 minutes, depending on what type of genre you want. With some things like science fiction, it's going to take me longer because I want to make it more believable, and I'm not a big, hardcore science fiction guy. I like science fiction, and I can write science fiction, but people like, God, who's a good science fiction writer? Like David Niven, who I used to read a lot of. Larry Niven, sorry, not David Niven. That's the actor. And quite a few others out there in the market would say I write science fantasy. I write science fantasy because my science is pseudoscience when I write it. Unless I do a lot of research, it's science that could work, but has no scientific basis to actually work. Whereas a lot of science fiction writers out there will do a lot of research. I have a good friend named Neil Reeby who writes kaiju fiction, monster fiction, and he's a big science fiction writer too. He'll do hours and hours of study for science fiction to make sure that all of his science works when he writes his book, so that anyone else who likes the science he's writing about, or the science fiction genre he's writing about, won't go back to that book and go, this is ridiculous. This can't possibly happen. I've got it easier in my genres like dark fantasy and horror and contemporary. I've got it easier because I know the genre. I know what'll work in that genre and what won't. So I can play around with a few things, like with Dark Creatures. I mentioned, for instance, if you've ever wondered by watching programs or TV or reading books on UFOs or anything, like, you ever wonder why Roanoke, for instance, if you ever look into the situation in Roanoke, you ever wonder why these mysterious things happen? Well, I kind of give you a point of why these mysterious things happen. It's because the whole world is a jigsaw puzzle. Every world is connected with every other world. There's a world sitting right beside you, right at the moment, mirroring everything that's going on, but just slightly different. And then it degrades into a fantasy world the further you get, or it upgrades into a science fiction world, depending on how far you get. There are multiple dimensions. So when the jigsaw puzzle moves and a hole opens up at one point, someone might see something they weren't supposed to see. Someone might fall into that hole and be lost. Whole villages might just suddenly vanish because a door opened and then closed. That's how I explain it. Of course, there are a lot of logical explanations. What's the fun of that? No one likes logical explanations when they can use their imagination. So as I said, getting back to the point of writing books, I always suggest you start with short stories. If you don't have a fantastic editor like Gene Turman of Lucid Style Author Services, I recommend you brush up on your grammar and such, so that you're not caught, because Amazon and a lot of other publishers out there will not do that for you. So if you write your own book and you don't do the hard work, and you don't pay someone to do the hard work, which is where my money goes, to make sure the book is classy and is spelled correctly and works good and well, you throw that up on Amazon and people are going to rip to shreds, which is not what you want. The one thing you do not want when you're a writer is flaming. Criticism is good. If someone gives you logical or constructive criticism about the book, that's always good, because it'll tell you what you're doing wrong with your characters, or what you might, in their perspective, why they didn't believe the world you created, why you didn't believe why this character walked up. How could this character do this? It's just completely unbelievable. That would be constructive criticism. Flaming, on the other hand, I'm sure what everybody's familiar with flaming is someone completely screaming at you about stuff that you made a mistake on. You missed. You did this. Look, this entire chapter is ridiculous because he spelled continuum wrong. I can't read a book where the person can't spell. Look, continuum right there. It's all spelled wrong. That's flaming. You really don't want flaming. Any writer who's worth his stuff has been flamed at least once or twice. Trust me. You really don't want to be flamed. You got to have a thick skin when it comes to that. But otherwise, constructive criticism you really should accept, or think about at least. Don't just throw it out and say it doesn't work. Now, there are people who will give you constructive criticism who don't understand what you're writing at the time. If you're writing a book especially, and they're reading it chapter by chapter, and they're giving you constructive criticism about, well, this person is doing this, wouldn't that make this a problem? Well, you've already figured that out, but you can't tell them that you've already figured that out. So you can't really take that constructive criticism. You can say, thanks, but you can't really tell them anything about it. Another good point would be if you're reading Dark Creatures and you see Doug, for instance, which is my villain, staring out the window at a little girl, might make you pause and go, maybe we should do something about this. But unfortunately, in the world that they're living in at the moment, no one realizes Doug's a villain. So, you know, that's things happen. I will read a little bit from the book if you want, if you like. I'm sorry to hold up all the time with my a conversation about writing and stuff like that, but it is something I'm really big into, especially creating characters and worlds. It's fascinating how you can do that on the spur of the moment just by walking around and looking at things. If you're looking for ideas, I've talked to 100 different writers on different panels and different stuff growing up and getting into this business who say that they have countless, they just can't come up with ideas. They have to dig into history books in order to come up with ideas. No. Take a deep breath, take a walk, feel what you decide you want to do in horror, and look around. Think about what's under the bed. If you're walking down the street of your own area, apartment complex, neighborhood, you want to write a horror story, what's going on in that house? What aren't you seeing? That'll start a story for you every single time. But I'll read a little bit about it. This first chapter one is called Hearts of Steel. Each chapter has its own title, so you can keep track of them. Sorry, let me get set here. She knelt in the mud of the crossroads, her head bowed, her long raven hair floating in the muddy pool of water. Her pale face and bright blue eyes reflected in the surface of the brown puddle. Leather armor as black as midnight covered her toned and athletic frame, enhanced at the chest and back as well as the calves and upper arms with shiny silver chainmail. In the first light of morning, one might imagine her to be a wraith or banshee. So still did she kneel, unaffected by the light rain that fell gently from the sky. The sound of beating hooves suddenly broke the morbid figure's repose. She turned her gaze from the road and looked upon the dark-cloaked man riding a white steed steadily towards her. Truly he resembled the pale-horsed rider in her mind. Oh, I'm sorry, screwed that up, pardon me. Truly he resembled the pale-horsed rider. In her mind radiated the memory of a vague figure from her past reading to her. From a past reading to her. See, I'm not really used to reading out loud. I apologize. Memory of a vague figure from her past reading to her from an ancient, particularly discarded tome about a forgotten god. She stood up to face the apparition, if that was what it was, as he rode up beside her and stopped. The figure, its body covered head to toe with dirty ash-covered cloth, turned its shadowy head to look down on the woman. A dusky, rusky voice forced its way from inside the rider's hood. Augury Parse. The woman nodded silently, still directing her gaze at the pale horse and not at the rider who sat upon him. One of those who you must seek is near. The rider lifted his covered arm and mummy-wrapped hand like a scarecrow, pointing in the direction of the nearest village. How fares my sword? The warrior woman became tense, then reached behind her for her intricately engraved sword. The bulk of the weapon gleamed with a ghostly light as Augury wrapped her palm around the hand grip. Carved ivory serpents coiled around the grip of the sword, twisting up to devour one another as they reached the crossbar. The section of the hilt from which the blade emerged was molded and engraved in a pattern of fire and smoke. From its center, a solid, forged, and engraved skeletal hand extended up to join with the grasp of the forte. That would be the blade. The bottom of the blade, the forte, the bottom of the blade. With one smooth stroke, Augury slid the long-bladed weapon from the sheath on her back. The dark blade moaned as she held it upright before her face. Again, her bright blue eyes glowed in rhythmic pulse with that of the sword, much like a heartbeat. La mia morte awaits, Augury stated in a plain, simple voice, as do I. The cloaked rider nodded once. Then, with a flick of his wrist, the horse bolted to life and was gone into the dawn. Sliding La Mia Morte back into its sheath, Augury Parse turned quietly in the direction of the village that had been shown to her. A wisp of a smile played on her mouth as she quickly began to walk in its direction. The town of Toulon looked more like a collective of mud, wood, and stone huts huddling around a somewhat larger structure that could only be the town tap. A small stone well occupied the center of the main street. Several old, exhausted women knelt around it, washing mud and sweat-stained clothes in the misty morning rain. Children chased one another in the muddy streets, waving sticks they imagined were mystic weapons, striking each other down like heroes of old. Augury took all this in as she walked down Toulon's main street. As she approached the well, the children stopped their game and stared at the tall stranger with a fancy sword hilt rising out of its sheath on her back. Whispering and giggling to each other as she passed, the women crossed themselves, then quickly picked up their wet clothing and hurried to whatever dilapidated structure they belonged. Augury slowed to a stop in front of the tap room. A weather-worn sign read "The Dancing Wench" and bore a faded picture of a half-naked woman gaily dancing just below the scrawled text. Music drifted from within the bar room, a soft, slow piece of music that complemented the wet, gray day. Pushing open the door, she entered the tavern. The sound of a lute filled the air, not a sad song per se, but not a happy one either. More a mixture of both flowed from the instrument played by a small, thin woman who leaned against the far corner of the room. Her sharp green eyes took Augury in at a glance, never once missing a note of the song she played. Her short hair, the color of fresh-picked corn, floated gently around her face as she nodded in a greeting in Augury's direction. The room itself had a damp, dim dirt floor. The wet weather was slowly turning the earthen surface to mud. A scattering of misshapen tables and chairs sat about the room. Three men in rain-soaked leather armor sat at the table nearest the window. Several others sat at tables further back in the room. There were 7 in all, counting the minstrel and the heavy-set barkeep. All turned to look at Augury as she entered. They returned to their own muttering conversations. Augury walked up to the fat, wrinkled barkeep. "Welcome to the wench, mistress." The old, gray-haired, half-bald barkeep glanced up quickly at Augury. "What be your pleasure?" He returned his glance back down to the dilapidated counter he stood behind, which passed as a bar. "A room," her seductive voice caused the 3 soldiers to turn and give her a second look. "I need a room for a day, maybe 2. "We be a tavern here, missy, not an inn," the barkeeper grumbled as he continued to wipe the corner in front of Augury with a dirty rag. "Drink and music be all we offer here. We got no rooms." So saying, he slid a clay mug down on the bar before Augury with a loud thud. "Are you sure?" She placed her black-gloved hand on the counter, palm open, facing down. "I said," the barkeep began to raise his voice, only to have it fade away. Augury slid her open palm aside to reveal a golden coin resting beneath it. He quickly snatched the coin off the corner, placed it between his gray and black teeth, gave it a tug, winced once before placing it in his shirt. "I got no room," he grinned, showing his missing and rotting teeth, "but I got a root cellar. You can bed down in if you like." As if taking notice of Augury and the sword she carried on her back for the first time, the barkeep cleared his throat. "If that please you, milady." He took a step back, obviously hoping he would not have to return the coin. "It will do," she nodded, waiting for him to show her the way. Scurrying around from behind the barkeep bowed once. "Pelton Liaudo, at your service." He gestured to her to follow him to the back of the bar and through the door to the outside. If you need food or drink, I can arrange both for a price, of course. He scurried to the two large doors at the back of the wench, facing up from the ground. He pulled one open with a grunt. Mind your step, me lady. He continued his attempt at a laugh. He cautioned his attempt at a laugh falling flat. Thank you. Sorry, as I said, I'm not used to reading out loud. Augury followed the now sweating Pelton Liarto down the narrow steps to the root cellar. She walked around the heavily breathing man to the far side of the room. Removing her sword from her back, she knelt down. She leaned it up against the wall beside her, then slid down to a sitting position on the moist dirt floor. So, is there anything else, my lady? Pelton rubbed his fingers together, unconsciously hoping for more gold. might be coming his way. No, Augury's tone left no room for doubt. Just leave me be. She settled her back against the wall. Need rest more than anything. As you see fit, lady. Pelton quickly bowed to avoid striking his head on the overhead beam of the cellar as he bolted upright. And Liardo, Augury's voice took on a dark and frightening tone. Do not disturb me today. I will come to you when I have awakened. Is that understood? Yes, my lady. The cold, dark tone of her voice made Pelton sweat even more. He turned more quickly than someone of his size would seem to be able, and scrambled up and out of the cellar, shutting the door loudly behind him. Augury slowly let her eyes close. The faint sound of a blacksmith's hammer hitting an anvil reached her ears. The sound was once comforting and hateful. She began to lose herself in a dream created by the pulse of the metal beat. So that is part of chapter 1. Chapter 1's really rather long, and then the rest are about 7 to 8 pages each. Chapter 1's 20. Does anyone have any other questions that they want to give me? Anyone available to ask any questions, or have you all bailed on me?
I still haven't read the books, but I'll more than likely be purchasing them just so that I can take what I've heard from you today so that I can, get more from reading it. So, yeah.
Do you have anybody have any questions? Anything about creating characters, creating atmosphere, writing books, reading books, which I'm doing terribly tonight. No? Oh, come on, there's got to be some questions out there somewhere.
Yeah, I do. So you love fantasy, obviously. I love fantasy too. I'd love to hear more about what you like to read.
Oh, good question. God, I love to read all sorts when I get into it. I love Stephen King's older work. I don't know much about his newer stuff because I haven't gotten into it lately. I know he just wrote a new one. I think it's called If It Does Bleed, or If It Bleeds, or something like that. I've read The Talisman he's written with Peter Straub, which was quite a good book. Long, but quite a big book. The Stand is also really quite good. My favorite is always going to be Firestarter or Christine. Those are some of his earlier works. I love Ben Bova. I've read him. He's a big science fiction writer. I used to read tons of fantasy. Andrea Norton. I read a lot of Japanese novelizations that have been translated. I like a lot of that. I got into the genre, for instance, I had a hint of the genre for the book based off of some of the stuff that's going on in Japan right now. It's really big in anime, for instance, right now, to have a character fall into a video game and be trapped in there. So I took that idea and I just put my own twists on it. But yeah, I enjoy almost anything fantasy related as long as, like, The Dragon Riders of Pern by not Andrea, but who wrote The Dragon Riders of Pern? Come on, brain.
Andy McCaffrey?
Thank you, Andrea McCaffrey. That's really good. Thank you. I read all that whole entire series. I've read the entire Dune series, although I cannot recommend personally, from my own perspective, I cannot recommend God Emperor of Dune, because at that particular point, I think he lost interest in the stories, and it just became a bunch of philosophical stuff that he was writing about, which wasn't really much of a story. But everything up to God Emperor of Dune, I can recommend. So yeah, I go all over the genre. It really depends on what takes my interest at the time, and if it's written really well. So as a reader, I don't compare people as a writer. At least I try my best never to compare people as a writer, because it's hypocritical. It really is. You can't look at a book and say it's terrible just by reading the back of the cover, or oh God, or they've stolen this idea from this person. So what I suggest if anyone does is, if the back of the book interests you enough to want to know what the book's about, don't go by the cover. Although the cover can attract you, because my cover attracts a lot of people. Don't go by the cover. Read the blurb in the back. If the back does interest you enough, then read, as a friend of mine, once again, Neil Reedy, who's a very good friend of mine, would suggest, is read the first 5 pages of the book. If the first 5 pages of the book grab you, then you might want to pick it up. You might want to think about picking it up. To be sure that you really might like the book, then after the first 5 pages, take about half of the book, open it up, and start reading another 5 pages. If the book still keeps you interested, then it's a book you're probably going to want to read. If you're looking to get into new genres, once again, that you're not sure that you're going to like, make sure, don't always, in my opinion, go by name. There are a lot of good authors out there. Oh God, I'm trying to think of a couple. I can never think of anything off the top of my head when I want to. But I've read a lot of older ones. Ray Bradbury's another great one that you can read from the past. Fantastic. He'll also, if you read his stuff, will also explain, as you're reading his short stories, he explains how to write a short story, how to develop a scene, how to walk you into that scene. For instance, if you're writing a short story, especially, take the littlest things. The littlest things will draw your attention and hook somebody into a story. For instance, the time of day. It could be, it was a beautiful October afternoon. I noticed because a single piece of paper danced down the street, almost as if it were dancing for me alone. That's a hook. That'll grab you into that story, because now you're going to want to know more about the person who's telling you this. Also, you should also look into if you enjoy reading or writing first person versus third person. There's a lot of people who will discount second person. They're saying that that's not a logical way to write a book. I disagree. I think second person and third person can go hand in hand, depending on how you reflect the scene that's going on around you. For instance, you can be a third person writer who's writing from the second perspective of the character you're writing about. So, for instance, as in my new book, for instance, I'm writing about a character who's falling from an incredible height that she realizes she could not possibly have gotten. It's almost as if she's flying, but she's falling from an incredible height. And as she's falling, she's looking down at the land below her, at the kingdoms that are below her as she's moving towards them. That gives me the option of telling you that this character, I can now explain to you about the kingdoms in this area and what's all about them, without actually having to go into this long chapter of going into long, because she's actually looking at them and thinking that this is what this kingdom's about, this is what this kingdom's about. That to me is second person, because you're telling a third person story from her perspective, which is a second perspective. That can be very, very handy if you do it well enough. It can be very unbelievable if you do it badly. So you should probably work on it if you really want to do something like that. Another great way to develop how to start writing a story is to read a lot, read a huge amount of books from all sorts of writers, because you'll definitely get an idea of what you like to read and how you like the stories to flow. As I said, when I was younger, I'm 54 now, and I started reading when I was 10. And before I ended up moving out of my parents' house, I had 3 library cases full of books. I love all sorts of genres, all sorts of different types of authors. To me, there's not a bad story, there's just an ill-conceived story. Someone who either didn't know what they wanted to write or, like, for instance, this Dark Creatures, A Simple Game could have been a very ill-conceived book because I started it based off a short story I wrote a couple of months ago, well, not a couple of months ago, last year actually, called Heart of Steel. But before I wrote the book, since I decided I was going to base the book starting off of the short story, I went and reread the short story so I wasn't out anything about or running into any misconceived problems. The same thing with Salvation of Tang Legel. When I had to put those 13 stories, or when I decided to put those 13 stories into one central story, I went ahead and read all 13 of those stories, and then I came up with a story that would pull them all together. It would make sense that they would all be told with this one point of view. And I really haven't had any really bad flaming comments about either one of them. My only big problem right now as a writer is what everyone has a problem with, and that's advertising, which is what I appreciate the Oregon Public Library for giving the opportunity to babble online. Anybody else have any other questions? Do you have anything, Kira?
Oh, I could ask thousands of questions.
I
really well, we have just like 3 more minutes. So to take us out, I'm curious how long it takes you to write a book from, or I mean, I guess it would depend, but can you tell us a little bit more about your writing process for Dark Creatures, A Simple Game?
Oh, certainly. In 3 minutes, I'll try to cram this down pretty short. Because I can talk about how to write a book for hours, as you can probably tell. In writing Dark Creatures, how I got it, how long it took me to write Dark Creatures. It took me a year to write Dark Creatures. It took me another 6 months to have it edited. And that's because my editor, who is a self-publishing editor, actually obviously edits other things, so she, couldn't concentrate on that book 100% of the time, which is why it took her a little longer to get this done. Plus, I had to get the artwork positioned in the book and stuff like that by the artists who are willing to accept the artwork for the amount of money I could pay them. But it depends. It can write for there's a new book right now, which is The Grand Game, Dark Creatures, The Grand Game, which is the second book I'm writing in a series. Might take me a good year or two to write, A, because I don't have the money to publish it in 2020, so there's no hurry. B, because I don't have, see, when I wrote Dark Creatures, I had a proofreader reading it who was begging me to write the next chapter, so I had to go home and write the next chapter. Right now, I'm floating pretty easily, so I can take my time to write it. So it probably won't come out until 2021, maybe 2022, depends, because I had medical bills I had to pay off because I had pneumonia a couple months ago, and I had medical bills are not cheap. Hospital bills are definitely not cheap, and that was all my writing money. But on a normal basis, if you were reading my book from chapter to chapter, and were willing to tell me, after you finish the chapter, what you liked about the chapter, what you understood about the chapter, what you didn't like about the chapter. Because I would take it all into account. I may not agree with what you disliked about the chapter or what you liked about the chapter, but I want to make sure that the reader understands what I'm writing about. So I'd be asking you a bunch of questions. Needless to say, if you were willing to do that, it would take me a year to finish the second book. Maybe a little less than a year, because I would be fired up to finish the next chapter so I can get the next answers that I need to move on to the next chapter. Right now, as I said, the book is delayed because of costs, hospital costs. So I'm not in a big hurry to finish it. So right now it's 2021, 2022, because that's when I'll be able to afford to publish it. And I don't have a huge fan base who are screaming for it. If I had a huge fan base that were screaming for it, I would definitely try to get it out faster. But yeah, it takes me about a year. And to write a short story, for instance, it takes me a week. Maybe a little less than a week. It really depends on how fired up I am about the story. Like, and during Halloween, if I'm writing horror during Halloween, it takes me 3 days to write a short story about that.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed your talk. Thank you for taking the time to share your mind with us. So I have your web page in the chat. Did you want me to send out that information and your email address to the people who registered?
Definitely. If anyone else has any questions, would like to talk to me about writing, would like to have me read something, get my opinion on anything, now I will remind you, it would just be my opinion. Don't take that as stone, like, oh my God, the writer said it was horrible. Never stop writing. But
Yeah, sure.
yeah, if you're willing to, if you're interested in getting my opinion or ask me more questions about writing, yeah, I am at TJ Ahrens, that's AHRENS, @gmail.com. Make sure you put in the header when you write that this is questions about the talk I gave, so that I know what's coming, who you are, because if you're from somebody else, I'm probably going to think you're just a spam and get rid of it. I do appreciate everybody who showed. I appreciate everybody who might be listening to this podcast or film later. I kind of hope I helped anybody or everybody with the book. I hope people buy the book. I really need you people to buy either one of the books. As I said, Tanglegull is probably fairly cheap on Amazon. I could probably work something out with you about shipping costs. If you think shipping costs are extreme, I might be able to work something out. We'll give you free shipping.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.